Welcome back to another episode of the Hustle Nation podcast. Today, as always, we've got a real treat. Mr. Jahmaal Marshall is in the house. Jahmaal is founder of Listen, Then Speak. He is a certified counselor, public speaker, podcast host, mentor, pattern disruptor, and he tackles burnout, codependency, and people-pleasing at the root with proven methods. Jahmaal, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris.
Thank you for being here. As I said before the show, I found you on LinkedIn, and as soon as I saw your headline, I said, we need to talk to Jahmaal. This is exactly what we like to talk about from a different lens, and I cannot wait to hear about this because, Jahmaal, I really believe that everybody who has a job, even stay-at-home parents, tackle burnout at some point, and I would argue that most people don't know how to deal with it. So I'm excited for that. But before we jump into that, why don't you give everybody a little background about who you are and how you got to where you are now?
Oh, man. Well, let's start in West Philadelphia. That's Will Smith's line.
Sorry, take it and run with it. That's fine.
No false information here. There's enough of that going online, so we're gonna be truthful. So originally from Los Angeles, California, and the family came here in '89. I'm the youngest of four, and I grew up in what I didn't know until I was about 7 years of age, a pretty dysfunctional household. So I had a parent who was nice enough, just absolutely divine, and my mom and dad who was mean enough to be Satan himself. I didn't realize till I was about 8 years old that he was a alcoholic and a drug addict, and his drug of choice was cocaine and heroin.
Wow.
And any type of alcohol he could get his hands on. And so growing up in that type of dysfunction, it was very difficult, to have any control at home. He could be very physically and verbally abusive. And so when you get handed certain narratives, you think, well, that is what I am, and that is how the world sees me. And somebody that I was supposed to relate to, I grew up in a lot of fear of. And so at home, I didn't have any control. And so I found a way to actually create control by being excellent at everything. And so straight A student, I wasn't super athletic, but when I played sports, I was good. I found a way to be good at something. And in class, I could be a bit of a class clown at times. I felt like if I made people laugh, I could control them. As a professional, I started my career at Department of Justice, outstanding and excellent on every performance appraisal. Top of my class, always dean's list. And what we see as excellence in today's market, for me, was a trauma response, because it was my way of, I will not kick up the dust and trouble any waters if I can somehow control people around me. And instead of kind of the type A, I'm going to be a little political here, don't be offended, folks, Donald Trump sort of personality of mowing people down, I control people through perfection. I control them through not saying no, a lot of times being a yes man. And up until about, let's say, 13, 17 years ago, I didn't really know the sound of my voice. I was such a chameleon. And so professionally, this followed me in relationships and choosing romantic partners. So my whole life, what it seemed like, man, that's the star player. That's the one I want on my team. It was just a trauma response. And it wasn't until 2009 where I made the investment, in my own mental health and wellness, thousands of dollars and many hours, as a matter of fact, 13 months precisely, where it was able to isolate some root causes in me, bitterness I had with my dad, unforgiveness. I grew up pretty quickly, needing to be the surrogate spouse of the household. All of those things were at play. And around 2006, I'll backtrack a little bit, my dad's life changed. I remember asking him, hey, we're a family of faith. I said, will you just go to church with us tomorrow? He was like, I'll think about it. And he came in the house one night, and his eyes were bloodshot red. He was so drunk. And he shared with me about his childhood and the way he grew up. And for the first time in like forever, I was endeared to him. And I was like, wow. So you had to raise a bunch of little siblings that weren't your children. So you love children, but you just didn't know how to show that love because you never had a childhood yourself. And so, you fast forward a little bit, there was a healing process that we went through that some fathers and sons never get to. But it got to the point where someone who I once hated became my best friend, and we were thick as thieves. But it wasn't, I was already past my 20s at this time. And so a lot of those formative years, I still had a mindset that followed me, a narrative that followed me. And then through the counseling process, and once I began training in counseling and training in the clinical and training in psychology, I began to see why I was showing up a certain way in life. And I realized that I actually wanted to help other people with this. Why don't I have any boundaries? Why am I, maximizing hours in what I wasn't created for? Why am I the first to get to work and the last to leave? Why I'm actually leaving money on the table when it's come time to negotiating because I'm allowing someone's reactions to control me. Like, oh, they have a certain look on their face. Well, maybe I should just kind of downplay it. So that narrative had followed me for so long. And it, I got certified in counseling and began taking a caseload around 2013. In 2017, that's when my dad actually had a major stroke. And at the end of that year in December, he passed away. So that was a big part of my story after he passed away. I felt like, man, because I was just coming back home. I just moved back to DC. And he got critically ill 3 days after I got back. And so that was a lot, living in a hospital for 2.5 months, and then he dies. So I went into a depression. Even as a person of faith, I hated God. I hated Jesus. Hated the gospel. Was about 2 seconds away from being an atheist. But it was a great time to reflect and get deeper roots and who I was and understand why I believe what I believe. And that's when I whipped out a Google Pixel and I would go into the woods and I would spew up all sorts of profanity to the skies. But being in nature was actually really healing. And so during that time, I would have like thoughts for a minute and a half. And I would just put them on video. I put them on this thing called LinkedIn. I was never on social media before. And people were like, who's this dude walking out in nature? And through that, believe it or not, I started getting like inbound leads. This was in 2020. People were like, are you a counselor? Because your name says, global lead. Because I was, I'd come back here and started working in HR and anti-human trafficking and investigations. And that's when somebody said, I didn't know what an inbound lead was. They said, Jahmaal, it's an inbound lead. People actually wanted to hire you. So I had to develop a business acumen. Took all my experience in counseling, everything I had gone through and all the highs and lows. And then what I knew from a clinical standpoint about brain neuroplasticity and actually developed, a 90-day, 12-week program. The total is 6 months, but phase 1 is 90 days. And I noticed the people who were reaching out to me were all the same. It kind of was a bit of an avatar, So 2021 was when I got the LLC, Listen Then Speak. I can't, it's so much in the interest of time I want to share with you guys, because when I started posting videos, someone actually had me on their podcast and they just wanted to talk to me. And I was like, I don't even have a business. And a podcaster actually heard that interview and actually began to sponsor me a Simplecast and says, I think you should start podcasting. It was weird. The female panelist asked me towards the end of that podcast, she said, are you a podcaster? I was like, no, that's not really my thing. She said, you should be, man. You're a natural. And so someone heard that. And then also a group in Pennsylvania, Launch Kits, actually offered to sponsor a web space for me. And that's where Listen and Speak was born. And so just to share with the audience, I don't want to jump around too much and lose people. I wasn't looking for Listen and Speak. It was looking for me, and just doors after doors began to open. And I realized, okay, this is something that, as I was working in anti-human trafficking, something that I wanted to build out. And more, it became where I was able to take clients, take enough contracts. And so this last year, 20th of January, I left my corporate job and I've been doing this full time. But for the better part of 4 years, I've been taking clients and really getting people results, because I believe in tailoring the counseling and the coaching specifically to their need. We know in 2020, everything that moves is calling itself a coach. I said, look, I'm not new to this. I'm true to this. I've been doing this for years. And I believe in pinpointing root causes, not so much in changing behavior, but actually tackling the belief that informs the behavior. That's where you get the results.
Man, the word that jumps out to me after hearing that story is resiliency. I mean, the trials and tribulations. Could you share? Just you talk a lot about mindset and brain training and things like that, right? So, what have you learned, in each of those different phases? You came to the edge a couple times, and yet you were able to pull yourself out. I feel like a lot of times when people get to that point, it's really hard for themselves to pull themselves out. It's usually someone else that needs to pull them out. So I'm curious, what have you learned to kind of get outside your own head to be free to almost talk to yourself and talk yourself out of it?
It's weird how it can kind of be let me do this myself, but it also has to do with other people. And I had to understand, what is my why. When someone's at the edge and they kind of, I once was in 2009 suicidal. You're really just thinking on a very insular stage, and all you can think about is, well, how do I end this? I'm really no good to anyone in this state or being alive. And I began to think about other people and what is my why. And I began to just connect the dots of what my purpose may be. And like, if I self-delete, if I take myself out, then what's the point? And I thought about just even some words my dad shared with me, just about the purpose that I had with just being his son. And I remember I didn't hear the words "I love you" until 2005 from him, and I was born in '84. So
Wow.
Really just getting that affirmation for him and knowing that for other young men like me and women, that there was purpose behind my existence. And so at some of those times when I was at the edge, I had to remember that, Jahmaal, this is bigger than you, man. There's people whose lives can completely change that's attached to you actually making it through this. And so when I thought about my why, that was the thing that constrained me. And we know constrained is a combination of compelling and restraining. Compelled me forward to actually keep going, and then restraining me from making really stupid decisions that are very final.
That's incredible. So one of the other things you mentioned was people pleasing. And as a self-professed people pleaser myself, actually I was meeting with one of our team members earlier today, and she was sharing, she's taken on a new role, and this was one of her challenges. Was she wants to be a people pleaser, and she wants to just solve everyone's problems, and she's not going to be able to make it at the next level doing that. She's gonna have to change her mindset around what that means and what she's doing there. So I know you talk a lot about kind of people pleasing and preventing burnout. Can you share a little bit about how those two tie together?
Oh man, they're kissing cousins, bro. Whether she's a career person or an entrepreneur, it's going to be impossible for you to level up and to scale if people pleasing is still the root of your motivations and your decisions. Because you're literally putting out fires that you didn't create, and you're literally burning the candle at ends that do not exist. I'll give you an example. One, working for a global organization, and being a new employee, especially, you get things punted to you. It's like, oh, we'll just punt this to Jahmaal, or we'll punt this to Casey. I'm just naming a name. And if you take it and say yes, you don't have the energy to actually direct towards your KPIs. Your KPIs are the reason that they onboarded you. And so I realized, like, when it's time for a performance, I thought I was really doing well because I was saying yes to so many people. And, I was getting really high marks, but it was also like, what you lacked in this area. And it's like, Jahmaal, you lacked in that area because you didn't have the time and the energy to dedicate to it because you said yes to everyone else. And it wasn't until this was a more recent one in 2019, I said no to some really powerful people that were higher ups. And I said, this is what the organization has brought me on to do. I cannot fulfill my KPIs if I'm doing this for you all. And I don't understand legal work. That's not within my scope. I was actually learning stuff way outside of my scope because I just wanted to make people happy and not kick up dust. And I said, Jahmaal, is the motivation for this decision fear, or is it faith of why you're here? If your motivation is fear, you're going to find yourself gassed out. And I had to remember, when you think about executives, they go home, they're not thinking about you. It's like, why am I thinking about you when I go home? You're not thinking about me. I need to think about what's been put in front of me as the project that I'm doing. And when I put my foot down, I was able to fulfill my KPIs. And so the burnout as a result of your fear of rejection is going to be the thing that is underlying and empowering. Well, I won't say empowering, but disempowering all your decisions. And ultimately, the root lies in the subconscious. It's like, what do I believe that's actually informing this decision? And how do I get down to the root of that? And I mean, you guys heard my story. A lot of it lied in my childhood, and most times working with clients, When we isolate those root causes, they get to see, oh, I've always believed this. This is the way I've always functioned because of what dad told me, or what mom told me, or what the siblings said to me, or what was handed to me. So I hope that's helpful, and I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Jahmaal, one of the things I hear you say a lot is say yes or say no. And getting to say no for a lot of people is very hard, especially earlier in their career. And I hearken back to a time when I worked for a social media company. And one of the things we always said as a leadership team was, clients would ask us to do this service or that service, which was outside of the normal services we'd offer. And we called it scope creep, meaning it's outside of the scope of what we normally do. And if you say yes more than a couple times, you start creeping outside of the specialty that you offer, which that was always what led to burnout. Taking a project that was a little bit outside the norm, and then we did it again because it was good money. And that, to me, scope creep often led to frustration and bringing down morale and eventually burnout. So I'm just curious how often you talk about that, or maybe it's something different. Maybe you're coaching people to say no.
It's a little bit of both. And I love the way you talk about scope creep, because with clients I have, especially the ones who may be more corporate, we know here as Western Americans, most people who are in management or middle management didn't want to be managers. It's like, I just want to be a subject matter expert. Give me my corner office or corner cubicle and leave me alone. I'm good. But the path to promotion is managing what? Direct reports. And so you have this person who's all of a sudden thrust into this position that they really didn't ask for, and is now managing direct reports and managing projects. But one thing they didn't learn is what? Self-management. And so in our practice is taking the NT off management. It's like, manage me. How do we manage you first? Manage your own psychology, manage your own beliefs, manage your own biases and prejudices, and just all the things you carry through the door. Sometimes we buy into this belief because of the blitzkrieg of information we live under, that somehow once, ladies, you put the heels on, or guys, you put the loafers on and you come through the door, you haven't brought the full you through that door. And so we want to deal with you from a holistic standpoint. And where is there a lack of self-management that doesn't empower you to manage your direct reports in a way that actually moves the needle forward? Because even for managers, if you're trying to please your team, you'll say yes to everything, and you'll actually even give them projects. So like, even when other divisions are saying, well, we need your team to do this project, it's like, does your team have the capacity for that? And so the ability to even say no, again, lies in the subconscious and lies in the ability to manage yourself and also manage your emotions. Often so say the mind is a control tower to the body, but also your psychology informs your biology. And so again, if there is fear, if there's anxiety in the biology, that can reinform your psychology. So then you renegotiate your no. And I share with all my clients, it's a phrase I've coined: non-negotiables that are renegotiated are non-negotiables in name only.
Yeah.
And so that's, again, dealing with the biological effects of the fear of rejection being at the root. Like, where is your anxiety in your biology reinforming your psychology that you continue to renegotiate your non-negotiables? That's problematic in both business, professionally, and personally.
So Jahmaal, how do you get somebody that's in that spot? They're maybe a new manager, right? And they're trying to, there is something about being a new leader, right? And showing them your passion and showing your willingness to tackle big things and energy and things like that. But there's always just the multitude of things that add up. I know one of the I guess phrases that I coined, I don't know if it's probably a great one, but that I've taught a lot of our leaders is to ask the question, what happens if you do nothing? And the reason being is because so often we feel like we got to solve everyone's problems. And when you just start with like, well, what happens if I do absolutely nothing? Usually nothing is going to happen. Right. So if maybe I don't need to do anything, right? Like I feel like I should because I've identified a problem or I've identified something, but just I feel like that happens so often with new leaders so quickly. And I've often thought about, that's been my one trick that I've tried to coach people on. But I'm curious, like, how do you get to that mindset piece? You talk about like is it your fear of rejection? Is it your mindset that's driving it? How do you get somebody to quickly kind of reprogram themselves to just see the path to burnout that they're starting.
Right. I want to first just affirm and just be brutally honest that there's not a quick reprogramming. If you think about the way we function, and it's another phrase I've coined, says a pattern remains a pattern until it's disrupted. The neural pathways that are dug in our mind are there, and they've been there for years. And imagine one of the ways I came on the map was by doing these walks through the woods. These are Civil War forts that have been here since the 1800s. I live here in Washington, D.C. So I'm walking, and you don't see me tripping over my own shoestrings because these are well-dug paths. So let's bring that back to the brain. You have well-dug neural pathways that are just smoothly dug, and things that whatever fires together or wires together will fire together. And so refiring and rewiring actually takes time. So if I was to go off that beaten path, that would be likened to me taking a machete to then, cut through some woods. And so we actually need to, I call the first 4 weeks of working with a client breaking up some fallow ground, because we actually have to cut down all of that belief system that has been there, that has been informed both consciously and subconsciously through narratives you've handed or that you believed. And then remembering this, not shaming people for their coping mechanisms. Sometimes overwork is a coping mechanism of escaping yourself. It's like the brain only knows what it knows. And so actually taking the time, we've seen so much EQ, everything moving as an EQ coach these days. But I think the missing piece is self-awareness. Most of my clients are empaths, so they're well aware of how other people are feeling. They even base most of their decisions, people pleasing, codependency, burnout, on how other people are feeling. But they never check in with themselves like, well, how did I feel about that? And where is my mind on that? And what is the why behind the what that's fueling that decision? That actually takes time. And it actually takes when, isolating root causes means, whoa, I have to actually look in the mirror and face myself down for where I've been, without any false guilt and shame, and then find a way out, And I would say, don't do that alone, because then you can get to the place where you'll start to self-bemoan. That's not effective. You want to do it with somebody that can walk through that process with you.
That's such a great point, because having gone through, reading the EQ book and training and things like that, and there's some good pieces in there, don't get me wrong. But I've seen so many times people that they take the score and they claim they're super self-aware. And from the outside looking in, you're like, man, that person has the least amount of self-awareness ever. And it's one of those, and I don't know how you say that to somebody other than say that to somebody, but I think that's a great point. The pathways, I think, is a really interesting point, because so many people believe they're self-aware, but it's so much of those pathways that they've dug that they don't even realize are there. That's really what's causing a lot of the negative that's going on in their life.
You said it perfectly, man.
Well, I was just repeating you. I didn't say anything.
So that must cut deep, Dustin, because you and I, and a lot of people we know in our circle, work a lot, right? And I don't know that I work a lot because it's an escape, but there's part of me that enjoys working. I like being busy. It drives me nuts when I have to sit around on the weekend on a couch and just watch movies, which everybody needs, right? And including me. But I love the feeling of productivity. So I find that interesting, Jahmaal. So when you get someone like me and Dustin who, like, a good Saturday to me is getting up at 5:30 or 6, getting in my office, getting 2 hours of work done before the kids are asking for breakfast, going outside, taking down the Christmas lights like I did on Sundays, 3 hours outside, making dinner, got the groceries, got a bunch of stuff done. I went to bed. I'm like, damn, that was a productive day. That felt good. That was a good Sunday. And some people they would say, hey, I spent 6 hours on the couch watching Netflix. That's a good Sunday for them. That's great. No judgment here. But is that a problem for some people like Dustin and I, that we just enjoy working?
I think the beauty of especially one-on-one coaching is that it's nuanced to the need of the client. It's one thing and you see even a lot of, in my field, so much stuff that is dedicated towards the cohort. And there's nothing wrong with a cohort. Like if you want to break something up that's a little bit more surface level, when it comes to the deeper things and specific results you may be looking for, if that's what works for you, man, that's what works. If you find that to be a productive Sunday, keep doing it. As long as you find that on Monday, at 5:30, 5:45 in the morning, you're not dragging because there's you didn't take advantage of the rest that was allotted to you. Now I realize I have clients that are agnostic, atheist, Muslim, Buddhist, you name it, all across the board. And on the seventh day, obviously, as a person of faith, we know that God rested. Who am I to outdo God? So, on Sundays, ain't a whole lot that I'm doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other than eating, sleeping, and taking that good old proverbial Sunday nap.
Yeah.
But I've also found this other Sundays where it's a great way to content plan, plan out my schedule, map out what the actual week before that, after that week looks like, because sometimes that week is already mapped out. It can be a great day to get stuff done and even to post content, because we know online people aren't as busy. So you can actually, from a marketing perspective, you can get stuff done. And so a person has to find what works for them. I think, especially we see in both of our in marketing, it can be, let me shame this person because they want to sit around and watch Netflix. If that's what they do to actually rejuvenate, why don't we build on what they do? And if a person wants to kind of have a full sort of, your Sunday sounds a little bit like a Monday almost, if that actually gives them energy, how do we then build on that? I believe when it comes to coaching, especially with the prices that coaches are charging, if you're charging top dollar, make sure it's nuanced to the need of the client in a way that gets them results that matter to them. That's very key in my practice.
So Jahmaal, let's go back to burnout, which I think is interesting. You mentioned that essentially there's a lot of different ways to recharge your batteries. And the way I refer to it so often is filling my cup so I can fill the cup of others.
That's it.
And when it comes to burnout, that can mean different things to different people. So Dustin and I might thrive at 55 hours a week on average, where some people that would be literal burnout because they may not enjoy what they do like we do. So when you come to defining burnout, I mean, how do you do that, and how do you prevent people from getting there? Because a couple of things that you mentioned was fulfillment, and so often to me, I can work and work and work and do stuff because I have a lot of fulfillment in my life. I have a lot of joy with the things that I do. I take a lot of time to fill my cup because I know I have a lot of cups to fill, like Dustin. I always joke that Dustin has 100 plus cups to fill, not including his family. And so you have to do things that fill you up so that you don't get to that burnout point. Is that a fair assessment?
That's definitely a fair assessment. And I think when we are overworked, we typically never identify what are those things that fill me up. And so we just continue to busy ourselves with things that actually drain us. 70% of my clients are females. And I didn't realize that till recently. I was like, man, getting a lot of ladies now, because I had like nothing but all guys when I started back in 2013. And then when I started, marketing the business the way it is now, and I realized because, as moms and wives and career women, they actually are called on a lot of times to always be on. It's like you can never have a bad day. You have to be the social barometer for the household, the friend group, the community group. I do have some guys in that sect, but it's like, and so with these women, it's like, well, what fills me up? And often it can be like a false guilt of everyone, I'm happy when what fills me up is everyone else being happy. And it's like, well, is that the truth? Or is there some underlying resentment being built up as a result of you've lived the last 10, 12 years of your life making sure everyone else is fulfilled, that you actually never took the time to fill your own cup. And there are cultural implications with that as well, especially with different ethnicities. What does that look like? And if you are a faith-based person, sometimes things that fill you up may be frowned on through your faith or through your culture. And so actually nuancing that to identifying with the person, what is it that fulfills you? What direction do you want to go in? And how are we not being even productive, even though that word is in my my headline, but how do we efficiently get there? We know scientifically that efficient people get done in 4 hours, but productive people get done in 9 hours. There's a way to be efficient. There's a way to time block. There's a way to actually move the needle forward without guilt. And a lot of times false guilt is the thing that fuels burnout. Well, let me make this decision for me, but then, I'm letting such and such down, or I'm letting my husband or the kids or my wife or my mother-in-law, my dad. It's like we let the false guilt actually cause us to then renegotiate. That goes back to the root causes. What's under there? What's going on in that subconscious that is actually fueling the conscious decisions? I hope that makes sense.
So when you tie some of these things together, right? You mentioned, your why in many ways. But one of the things Chris and I have talked about for years is this idea that a lot of people have this view of hustle as it can almost accelerate you to burnout. And what we've seen time and time again is because people don't have that clarity of vision. They don't really understand where they're headed and then why they're headed, and take that time. Then everything you're doing around, hustling and working hard and trying to accomplish, it just accelerates you to burnout because you're not going to the right spot. You're going to the wrong spot. How do you try to get somebody in their own head to really define their why? As we've coached a lot of different people, I feel like that's often a gap where it's really hard to coach somebody to their why. But if they don't see it and they can't articulate it, then it's really hard to get them more efficiently to their results.
Yeah, it's an exercise that I actually do with clients one-on-one, and it's actually a whole worksheet I take them through to actually get them to understand, what are you fighting for, or who are you fighting for, and what does the result mechanism look like? How does life look like, a year from now, 5 years from now? And a lot of times, some of us can't even make those projections. We're just in the moment, like, I don't even know, And so it's actually isolating for them. What is your why? What is your purpose, even in the moment? And sometimes some people can do it in one fell swoop. Some of them, like, I need your help. I need you to actually sit with me in this assignment so that I can actually define this, because I don't know. And it's amazing. Some people may be in their 40s. They may be in their 50s. They may be, one of those 37-year-old, up-and-comer career people, but they never took the time to pause. And it's a phrase I've coined. It says the problem is in the pattern, but the power is in the pause. Let's actually pause and look at some of these things and take an inventory. And once we take an inventory of where we have actually gone overboard, in a lot of, whether it's personally or professionally, and where it has not been fruitful, or where it has yielded very little, then we see, okay, that's a place where I've actually wasted energy. That's not a place where I want to continue to direct my energy. So many times, when you think about root causes and you think about most of our excellence being a just defense mechanism to, in a sense, ward off that rejection that we so fear, that's where we actually want to go back to. And when we go back to that place, then we can define, okay, this is my why. And a lot of times their why is actually solving, much like my why. It's like, I want to save people all the time. I waste it. The very thing that bugs you the most is the problem that you were created to solve. And sometimes until we actually sit with ourselves, we don't even see, what is that thing? What annoys me? What gets me out of bed? What gets me going? Because that's going to be the fuel that actually helps you to, one, direct your energy where it's most profitable, and then learn to say no and be clear on your no with saying yes to things that have nothing to do with your why. And it takes time to identify that. But once you identify that, then you, as we call in marketing, power position yourself, making yourself a big fish in a small pond.
It's funny. Literally this morning, I had a team member that came to me and we were having a quick conversation. And then leaving there, he's like, "Well, can you do that for me?" And it was a relatively small task. It would have taken me 2 minutes to do. And I'm like, you know what? Tell you what, just you got it. And the reality was, it was entirely benefiting him. He was more than capable of doing it. But I know why he asked the question, because 9 out of 10 times I probably would have been like, yeah, sure, I'll just do it right now. Right? And to your point, the clarity of your no, and the clarity of really what is your value and what are you focused on, can make all the difference. It's really easy to get out of that headspace consistently, because it's so easy to do, so easy to fall back into that trap.
Let me give you a concrete example. This was back in 2015, and I was working at a place that had gone through a very big corporate split. So that means we had lost half the staff and half for leadership. And I had to step up 2 levels over my own and became one of 3 senior counselors. So my caseload increased. Then I also was handed to manage a remote program, which means managing 18 other remote counselors, their caseloads. And then they also wanted me going up to prison in Indiana. This was from Kentucky, which is a 2.5-hour trip one way. Imagine the 2 hours working there and then the 2.5 hours back. So that's pretty much 8 hours out of the whole day. And the person I was going with was a board member. So very respected, obviously a high net worth donor. But I was burning out, and we had gone through a split. So it's like, man, if I say no, they really want me to do this. They like me doing this. But it's like, my purpose here is the guys that are on my caseload. And my purpose is we have a remote program that to me is really subpar. I can build this thing out and make it the best. And I did. I actually put together training for the counselors and really built up something that was really, really fruitful, stuff that they still use today. I'm not even there any longer. And so I took this to the CEO and I said, listen, he doesn't sign my paychecks. You do. I can no longer do this and fulfill the mission of why I'm here and the reason why I'm here for these guys. People who are in prison, I love them, but that's not my ministry. That's not my calling. And so I have to redirect my energy to where I'm called. And it was handled. But I had to be very firm and very direct with some very powerful people. And after it got handled, this said person who was a board member didn't speak to me for a year. So I want to say that to your audience. When you establish boundaries and you're clear on your no, it may not be this rose-colored thing of people are not going to be happy. I'm going to be very clear here. You're going to piss some people off. Be willing to do that. Be willing to piss people off to actually find out what your why is and what fulfills you and what your purpose is. Because I can guarantee you, even revenue is on the other side of that, other than wasting energy to not kick up dust. I did that for the better space of like 4 or 5 months. Save yourself the time. And if you think, well, how will they react? They may not react the way you envision, but you won't regret it. I can tell you I didn't.
Jahmaal, you said something there that stuck out to me, and you've said it a couple of times now, I believe. That's not my ministry, which resonates with me so much. I may use a different language, but coming from someone who's got a big background in faith, that's awesome. I think a great nugget for a lot of people. But I often refer to my non-negotiables. Having a very deep marketing background, I have some things that I do both in business and then also in marketing that are my non-negotiables. Basically, some things I would never do, and then this is only how I do some things. And Dustin and I have kind of took our framework and melded them together for Hustle, which has worked out amazing. But you also alluded to something that was going to be my next question, which was about boundaries. And that last statement about sometimes you're going to have to say some really hard things with some really important people. One of the things that it reminded me of was recently, as you know, and I think you alluded to this too, man, do I get a lot of messages in my inbox, whether it be on LinkedIn or in my email. Everybody wants to sell me something. They want to meet with me about something. And my first question back has always been, help me understand what you want to meet about. Do you want to sell me something? Are you interested in my services, or do you want to network? And I'm very clear. I say, my schedule is so full that I rarely take networking calls or one-to-one coffee calls. And then so often when people meet with me, I find if I allow them to meet with me, they're very quick. Like they're very respectful of my time because I've set that boundary and the expectation that, look, I don't have a lot of time. I'm happy to meet with you if it's something that can be mutual beneficially, but I'm not just going to grab coffee and shoot the breeze. Now, that's been one of my first steps over the last couple of years of kind of raising a wall a little bit, raising some boundaries. And it's become so much easier when you do that. So I'm curious how you help people with those boundaries, because it is kind of like the law of attraction. When you see them work, it's like, I need to do more and more of this, especially with loved ones too, by the way.
Yeah, I think, and it can be different based on if you're a career person or if you're an entrepreneur. Those of us who are business owners, you learn very quickly, okay, I have to gatekeep. If I don't gatekeep, there's going to be nothing left of me, because your marketing, your HR, your governance, your finance, you're the actual product. And so when you hold all those hats, you realize, like, man, if I'm not on it and I'm not saying no to things that really don't move the needle forward and don't generate revenue or don't position me to, for my purpose, there's going to be nothing left of me. And even if you're a career person, especially a manager, you still remember, your team is dependent on you to lead yourself first before you lead them. And if you're saying yes to everything, or also saying yes and allowing your team to take a load that they should not take, that's going to reflect bad on you. And so, going back to your question, Chris, just answering it very specifically, those non-negotiables are critical, man. I mean, for me specifically, I know when it comes to meeting, I'm very similar to you. It's just like, what exactly is this for? And I have stuff that's still sitting in my inbox. It's just sitting there because it didn't make sense. It's like, and I don't want to. I want to be very fair and non-discriminate, but it's just like I think I already know where this is going, and we're good on that. you know, and so it's helping clients actually identify for themselves, like, is that a need right now, or is that a want? And what compels you to feel like you need to say yes to that? Are you just saying yes to that so that person may like take a liking to you? And is that energy that's just being expended? Even when we're on LinkedIn, we hear everything about this is how you go viral on LinkedIn. Do I need to do that for my business?
Yeah.
I think we all know people who have 4,000 followers who are closing out $400,000 contracts.
Right.
Do I need to actually have 800 likes and 44 reshares to generate revenue? No. Actually, the opposite will probably happen. It's that post that got 37 likes that you thought you wanted to delete, that actually your ideal client was waiting for you to post. Don't delete that post.
That's exactly right.
Jahmaal, we're running out of time, but I have to ask you this one last question because you are the anti-burnout guy. And as we talked about before, we are hustle. But we are also anti-burnout. However, as you know, there's a movement of people, not a big population, but a small population of people who are anti-hustle. And I think the term is maybe misunderstood by a lot of folks, or maybe it's gotten a bad name by some folks like Gary Vee, who I love. But I digress. What's your take on the anti-hustle movement?
One, we're in a digital world where you only see so much. And so when I see people from the anti-hustle sort of background, I have to question, like, well, is this a 1, 2, 3, 4 income household where you can kind of just lay around and say, oh, I've been on a beach with a pineapple while someone fanned me with a leaf? It's like, I live in Washington, D.C., and this is a 1 income household. So I have to grind at a level that other people don't. If I don't work, we don't eat. And so understanding that there has to be some hustling involved, but also need to know, when do I dial it back from a sustainability standpoint so that years from now, in my years to come, I will still be here. So for the anti-hustle people, I find a lot of times your brand or your business is either bankrolled by a very rich sugar daddy or sugar mama. I'm just going to be very direct and really forward here. You may be living off some government assistance while you have an online brand that looks like it's making some revenue. You probably are getting a lot of likes, but not really making revenue in your brand, because what it takes to build a business is a lot of sacrifice. And so I do believe, obviously, being an anti-burnout guy, you have to know when to turn it off. You have to know when to say no. And you guys are both husbands and fathers. And so you have to know, like, okay, where am I not present? And where do I need to be present in a way that has eternal gain and eternal value? I'm going back to the ministry word. I know that sounds faith-based, but ministry just means service. Where do I not need to be of service? And if you think about it in business, you can get your hand plugged in all sorts of stuff where it's just like, this is not moving the needle of my business or my company forward. And for your career people, you can get caught up in all sorts of scope creep where this has nothing to do with my KPIs. And so I would say work hard, but actually identify. That's where the power is, in the pause. Identify what doesn't move the needle forward and exit left. And do it knowing that there'll be some kickback. One thing I in working with clients, I say at about 4 to 8 weeks, guess what you're going to go through? Withdrawals. Withdrawals from what you have been doing, because you'll keep doing what you've been doing until you disrupt those patterns. But when you disrupt those patterns, the brain naturally will just go through withdrawals because it only knows what it knows. And when it's going through that relearning process, a lot of times it's like coming off drugs. Let's be graphic here. You seen a person come off methamphetamines? They lock them in a room so that they can just detox. Sometimes we have to actually lock ourselves out of this so we can detox from the hustle mindset that is not profitable, that is not sustainable. Because some people talk about, well, I'm just going to be here until I outlast the next man. Well, what'd that do to your marriage? What'd that do to your community? What'd that do to your friendships and those things that long after all this stuff is gone, what do you still have? Like, I'll say this, on your funeral, no one will care about your viral post. No one will care about your post that says our company did this much revenue. No one, the minister is really not going to say any of those things. And so we actually have to hold these things up and weigh some things out in light of reality.
Good stuff, Jahmaal. We appreciate you being here today. That was so insightful and a nice, refreshing take on some of the other subjects we discussed. Before I let you go, tell our audience where they can find you and what you got going on in terms of services.
You got it. So you guys can find me easily on LinkedIn. I'm the only Jahmaal Marshall, literally, in all of LinkedIn. Easiest person to find. My sales funnel is mindsetmastermethod.com, and that'll give you a little bit of how I work with the system, what the process is, and what I have going on right now, of course, is 12-week transformation, and you can find that through the Mindset Master. And if you want things if 12 weeks is a little daunting, you may want like a one-on-one mentoring or 3 weeks, you can go to my top mate and you can click on different appointments to make there, because sometimes some people just need a time audit. And we actually do time auditing. We actually audit, like we sit down and identify what those non-negotiables are. So there's some shorter programs that are 3 weeks, but the main thing I would say, definitely sign on for the 12-week Mindset Master Method. And there is a 2024 Accelerator Scholarship that I'm offering right now to the first 10 that sign on for this. So that's what's going on. And also my website, which is listenandspeak.com.
Not to mention the podcast, which you can find from the website or from LinkedIn. Jahmaal, thank you so much for being here. That was awesome. I think subject matter that anyone and everyone should be paying attention to. For all you listeners out there, thanks for tuning in to another episode. We'll see you next time. Peace.